in this part of Scotland. Canada was a far more attractive prospect, except for the cost of getting there. Land was allotted to the tenants down along the coast on Pentland Firth. It was thought that they would learn to fish, and no one could imagine even a Highlander would be a blot on that landscape. It was, in fact, an invitation to starve. The people could go to the factories in England or farther south in Scotland, but the Highlanders were not thought good industrial material. They conformed badly to the discipline and rhythm of the machine. Women were more malleable, and children even more so if they were caught young. New Lanark, south and east of Glasgow, was the scene of the most famous experiment in adjusting people, mostly children, to the discipline of the machine. The mills were turned by the waters of the Clyde. It had been a noted beauty spot. An early industrialist, taken to see it, saw not the beauty, only the wasted power. He was David Dale, the Scottish capitalist and philanthropist. In recent times, his face has graced the notes of the Royal Bank of Scotland. Dale's idea was to go to the orphanages of Glasgow and Edinburgh and rescue, in a manner of speaking, the occupants. Work in the mills for the orphans was then combined with schooling in an atmosphere of the highest moral tone. The orphanages were saved the cost of feeding the children, and the children earned their keep in productive and compassionate surroundings. Compassion was occasionally extended to adults. In 1791, a ship loaded with Highlanders en route to North America was driven ashore at Greenock. The passengers were disenchanted with ocean travel, and they probably had no money with which to proceed in any case. So Dale brought them to New Lanark. After a shipwreck, it appears, even a Highlander could adjust to the rhythm and discipline of a machine. Philanthropy at New Lanark was not allowed to interfere with the practical need to return a profit. Only after a solid 13-hour day in the mills did the children go to this school for an hour and a half in the evening. You shouldn't be too shocked. By the standards of the time, New Lanark was a place of compassion and culture, if not exactly of rest. This was even more the case after 1800, when Dale's son-in-law, Robert Owen, the great Robert Owen, took over. Owen was a philosopher, utopian socialist, religious skeptic, and spiritualist. And reformers now came from all over Europe to visit New Lanark and to see for themselves this proof that industry could have a humane face. Under Owen, the Institute for the Formation of Character was built. It offered lectures for adults, singing and other recreation for the orphans, and a nursery school for the very young. The workday for the children was now reduced to 12 hours, and children under 10 were never employed. It's an indication of how things were elsewhere. New Lanark didn't really satisfy the utopian vision of Owen, so there was a sequel. This was New Harmony, Indiana, which was to be a cooperative Elysium on the banks of the Wabash. It would be a completely fresh beginning, a new community with no capitalist genesis, no acquisitive taint, and its principle would be not Smith's self-interest, but service to others. Idealists came to New Harmony, and so did a really historic collation of misfits and misanthropes and freeloaders. And once they were there, they devoted themselves more or less exclusively, not to service, but to argument. New Harmony didn't work. Adam Smith was upheld. The mills at New Lanark flourished under Smith's system, and like Smith's ideas, they were eventually overtaken by change. Capitalism both creates and destroys, as Joseph Schumpeter many years later was to affirm, but Smith's ideas lasted longer than the mills. In Smith's system, as I've noted, the state, hitherto large, oppressive, expensive, would shrink in size. The unseen hand, self-interest, would now rule. Landlords, farm workers would enjoy the income they received. Also the new capitalists over on the right. Prices set by competition would reflect the cost of production. That would be the cost of rearing, feeding, sustaining the labor that went into the product. This was the labor theory of value. This and the tendency of wages to fall to subsistence levels would concern the next generation of economists, who would be much less optimistic than Smith. In the 25 years following Adam Smith's death, both ideas were taken up in London by two close friends. One was David Ricardo, Adam Smith's only serious rival for the title of founding father of economics. With Ricardo, the great ethnic rivals of the Scotch arrive. Ricardo was Jewish. He was a stockbroker, a member of Parliament, a man of superb clarity of mind and of deep obscurity of prose. His friend Malthus, a non-practicing clergyman, was unquestionably English. Malthus, for much of his life, taught at Haileybury, the staff college, as we would call it, of the East India Company. His wife was famous for her tea parties. In the last century, the East India Company employed three of Britain's greatest economists. Besides Malthus, James Mill, and his prodigious and luminous son, John Stuart Mill. None of these, I might note, was ever in India. Nor was this thought to be a handicap. James Mill produced a powerful critique of the Hindu epics, which he deeply disliked. He could not read them in the original, and they had not then been translated into English. The Mills, needless to say, were also Scotch. Malthus held that, given the passion between the sexes, a most inconvenient thing that he sometimes thought might be subject to moral restraint, and against which he believed ministers should warn at marriage, population would always increase in a geometric progression. 1, 2, 4, 8, and so on. At best, the food supply would increase only arithmetically. 1, 2, 3, 4. From this came the inevitable result, with which his name has ever since been associated. In the likely absence of the moral restraint, population would have a persistent tendency to explode. It would be checked only by war or by famine. Adam Smith had a generally optimistic view of the prospects for man. No one has ever thought Malthus an optimist. Ricardo's mind extended to industry, although he was still deeply influenced by agriculture. Malthus's population became his workers in field and factory. They grew in number, competed for the nearly static food supply. They paid for this competition in high rents, high prices, low wages to get jobs. The result was that workers received only the minimum necessary for survival. This was the iron law of wages. It also nurtured the distinctly pregnant thought that since labor set the value of things, the product belonged to labor. Voiced by Marx a half a century on, this proposition would shake the world. But under Ricardo's system, the workers did not get the product, nor did the capitalists. The wealth went to the landlords. The same pressure of people on